I'm only going to say it one more time, and then you're going to lose the privilege to eat dinner. And she was saying her prayers, and she said the cutest thing. I thought it was so cute. And I started laughing. She said, "Dear Heavenly Father, please help me to survive."
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. He's hungry and he's thirsty.
Police say this is the house a young child escaped from and went to a neighbor's house asking for food and water. They said that that child was severely malnourished along with another one they found inside the same home.
They're going to be in the hospital for 3 days.
So weird. It's just not necessary. And I'm a good woman. I don't do naughty things. I don't do naughty things. I'm a really good girl.
This circumstance is tragic. It's largely, of course, of your making. Your conduct in this case was disastrous for these children. Adults are supposed to protect children. In this case, you terrorized children, and the results have been tragic.
All right, so I've been putting this off for a long while, but I think it's finally time that we talk about the YouTuber turned convicted criminal, Ruby Franke. This story has a lot of moving parts. It requires a lot of background knowledge and context, so we're going to be going into that first, but I just want to give a warning up front that this video will contain a lot of talk of abuse, physical, emotional, mental, so I just want to say that up front, but I will give a warning once we get more into it as well. So Ruby Franke and her husband Kevin had their first baby in 2003. They lived in Utah and they were part of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, or the LDS Church as it's more commonly known. And in 2015, they started their very popular YouTube channel called 8 Passengers. From the outset, this seemed like a very normal family vlogging channel. Ruby would document the life of her husband and their 6 children and their crazy life together. She would often give parenting advice, mental health help, as well as spirituality advice. And this was a very popular channel. At its height, it had over 2 million subscribers and it had over 1 billion views. So a lot of people had their eyes on Ruby Franke and her family. But as their channel was gaining more popularity and more people were watching their videos, alarm bells started to go off for some people. Now, I'm going to go into some of the red flags that were seen from the 8 Passengers channel, but I do want to note that the channel was deleted from YouTube in 2022, so we don't have a lot to go off of besides the bits and pieces that were re-uploaded. In one video, we learned that one of the older children named Chad had actually been sleeping on a beanbag chair for 7 months because he had played a prank on one of his little brothers named Russell.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October. And they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago.
In this video, Chad tells the audience that he had woken Russell up at 2 a.m. being like, "Hey, pack your bags, we are going to Disneyland." So Russell, being super excited, got all of his things packed, made his bed all neatly, put on his little baseball hat, and was waiting outside for a while before Chad came out and was like, "Haha, I pranked you, we're not going to Disneyland." And obviously Russell was like super upset because of course, like, being a kid and thinking you're going to Disneyland and then all of a sudden realizing that you're basically lied to, that would hurt, yes, but also Chad is a child. He, although older than Russell, made a mistake. Kids do that. They play pranks on each other because they don't know their boundaries yet. And kids need to learn those as they go. I am obviously not a parent, so I can't speak from experience, but I have to imagine that there are better ways to discipline your child other than taking away their bed for 7 months. And as Chad is telling this story, he's kind of giggling, and you can hear people in the background. They're also kind of getting a kick out of this retelling of the story. And in response, Ruby says this.
Do you think it's funny? Because...
And then I walk out.
If you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
I just think it's interesting that Ruby is so intense about this subject when everybody else in her family kind of seems to be on board that this was a funny prank looking back. And this appears to be from the same vlog, just from some like context clues, but Ruby also openly admits that Chad had been sleeping on the floor in the family room too.
Chad didn't get any room. He didn't get anything. He was sleeping on the floor in the family room.
So it seems like this is kind of a disciplinary action that Ruby likes to take, just taking beds away from her children. In another vlog, Ruby talks to her audience about her parenting techniques when it comes to her daughter Eve. Now, Eve is one of her younger children, and at that time, I think she was in either like kindergarten or first grade, and her teacher had texted Ruby being like, hey, I noticed Eve forgot her lunch. Could you maybe stop by the school and just bring her something to eat so she has a lunch for the day? And Ruby evidently texted the teacher back and said,
Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. And hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
Along the same vein, her younger son, Russell, that we talked about earlier, at one time she's talking about how he forgot his lunch money or he misplaced it. And again, she says, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to either get food from somebody else or go hungry, because if you're not going to be responsible for your lunch money, then it's not my responsibility to give you lunch money or give you food. Your child's brain needs food to grow and to become healthy and strong and intelligent. Like, that's just the way it is. And she's just depriving her children of that. I think it's disgusting and sick. And again, children make mistakes. It's part of life. And to teach them that, you forgot something one day, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to pay the consequences. Not like, hey, I'm gonna bring you your lunch, just try to remember next time. Or, hey, like, if this happens consistently, then maybe we should try to figure out a plan, like a reminder or something. But to just like cold turkey, like, no, you don't get food for the day, I'm sorry, but that is abuse. And there are other clips, there are other allegations from people that knew the Franke family that go more into detail about how they abused their children during their time on YouTube. I'm not going to go into all of that, but I just thought these little stories would kind of give some context into the life of Ruby and Kevin Franke. And so when people online were seeing these types of videos, they were obviously concerned. So much so that a petition was even started a few times to try to get CPS involved in this family's life. And Ruby pretty quickly responded to all this pushback saying, you know, we're not going anywhere. This is how I parent my children, blah, 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 blah. But CPS did actually visit the home a few times, but unfortunately there just wasn't enough evidence to do anything. And I feel like that is the case with a lot of different family situations, unfortunately. So at the beginning of their YouTube channel, 8 passengers would post 5 times a week. But after all of these allegations started to swirl around the Franke family, they decreased the number of uploads until in 2022, the channel was officially deleted. And it was at this point that Ruby switched gears from more of this like family vlogging lifestyle to teaming up with a therapist named Jodi Hildebrandt. Now, Jodi had been a licensed clinical mental health counselor since 2003, and she had also founded this company called Connections. Ruby actually began working for Jodi as a mental health coach, and together they also had an Instagram page called Moms of Truth, they had a YouTube channel, and they had a 1.3-star podcast also called Connections. So I actually went through and I listened to a couple episodes of this podcast, and I can understand why it has 1.3 stars. Because anybody with any lick of common sense would understand that this is not great advice. For example, in one episode, a concerned parent writes in talking about how they're scared about their son's increased phone usage. And their kind of like solution for all of this is to just take the phone away cold turkey. Like, your son doesn't deserve a phone, it's just a distraction, blah, blah, blah. Which is true. A phone is a distraction. But at the same time, the parent writes that the son was using the phone to read their scriptures because they're Mormon. So it's like, you're going to take your son's phone away even though he's using it for things that aren't distracting, that are like for betterment, for religious purposes. Just going to take the phone away. These two women, Jodi and Ruby, kind of are like all or nothing. Like, you have to go cold turkey or else it doesn't count. And I think that that's kind of their downfall. I mean, They have many different downfalls, but I feel like that's one of them. Like, they're like, just deprive your children of everything. If they can't handle it, deprive them of everything. And it's like, no, things aren't black or white. Went on a little tangent there, but I just had to say that. And I couldn't find exact dates for this, so I apologize. But at some point, Jodi did start counseling Ruby and Kevin Franke, and she actually moved into the Franke home for some reason. I don't know why. But then Jodi actually convinced Kevin to move out of the family home to work on himself. And we're going to get into more of that later. And then I don't know why, and I don't have an exact date, but I'm assuming it's sometime like late 2022, early 2023. Ruby and her 2 youngest children actually moved into Jodi's home in Ivins, Utah. So at this point, it seems like Ruby's kind of getting on the right track. She's separating from Kevin. She's kind of distancing herself from this YouTuber life, getting into more like therapy, mental health coaching. But it's important that we stop here and talk about this person that she's suddenly hanging out with, Jodi, because Jodi has a dark history all of her own, and I think we should get into it. Jodi started working for a company that specialized in sex and porn addiction in 2008. And around this time, a couple was actually referred to Jodi by their LDS bishop, and Jodi started counseling this couple. Then over the next 2 years, Jodi would speak to both the LDS clergy and the Honor Code office of Brigham Young University about the husband of this couple, and his name was Adam, and she did this without the proper authorization. From what I know about my personal experiences with therapies, to the best of my knowledge, a therapist can't go and talk to anyone else about your problems, about your therapy sessions, unless you're planning on hurting yourself or hurting somebody else. Because therapists are mandated reporters. If you're planning to do something, they have to alert the proper authorities. But other than that, that should stay confidential between you and the therapist. But Jodi was going around spreading these lies about Adam to anybody that would listen. Adam was actually interviewed about this topic, and he said this: "She spent hardly any time knowing about my life. She didn't want to talk about my personal goals or my progress. She would only threaten me that if I didn't take more sessions and have my wife take more sessions, the alleged addiction would destroy my life." Now, I couldn't find exactly what type of lies Jodi was spreading, but since she was a sex and porn addiction counselor, I'm assuming she either made up the fact that he had an addiction or maybe, kind of amplified the amount of problems that Adam was having with his addiction. But she was spreading these lies so far that even therapists wouldn't take Adam as their clients because she was just spreading lies to even the therapists in the area. So he was really stuck in this abusive relationship with Jodi. Evidently, at some points, he was spending anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000 a month on sessions with Jodi. Thankfully, all of this was brought to the light though, and Jodi actually ended up having to be on a probationary period for about 18 months where all of her work was very strictly monitored. Then in March of 2010, a teenage girl came to the American Fork Police Department asking for protection from her own aunt. She said that this woman was mean and strict. She wouldn't let the teenager talk, even duct taping her mouth shut at some points. She was forced to wear the same clothes for weeks on end, and was even forced to sleep outside in a sleeping bag. Additionally, and what I think is the most interesting thing of all, is that this teenager was not allowed to go to school as part of the aunt's therapy plan. And of course, I'm sure you can all guess that this aunt was actually Jodi Hildebrandt. And this teenager was sent into Jodi's care because of her defiant behavior at home. After all of this was reported to the police, the teen was sent to a short-term shelter, but then on March 23rd of that year, Jodi Hildebrandt actually called the police department saying that this teen had run away from home. After talking to the parents, the police found that this was the third time that the teen had run away from home, and then after digging even deeper, the police found out that the teenager had actually texted her friends that night saying, "Dude, save me, I'm trapped." And once she was back with the police, she said this: "Jodi is some kind of therapist and thinks she has all the answers, but Jodi insults me all the time in front of others and acts like I'm evil by not letting me talk to kids or others." Now that we know a little bit more about Jodi Hildebrandt, let's fast forward to August 30th of this past year, 2023. A man hears his doorbell ring at around 10:50 a.m. and he doesn't answer right away, but when he does, he sees a sight I'm sure he was not expecting. A 12-year-old boy was standing in front of this man asking for him to call the police. He looked thin and malnourished. He was wearing an old shirt that was torn and had blood on the sleeve. He was wearing no shoes, and he had duct tape around his wrists and his ankles. Immediately concerned, this man calls 911, and while they're waiting for the ambulances and paramedics to arrive, a woman comes out and kind of comforts the boy, gives him some food and some water. But it's only when authorities arrive that they realize the full scope of this boy's injuries. I'm not really going to go into detail about the specific injuries because it is incredibly heartbreaking and gruesome, and I feel like this case is that way already. But it's just hard to imagine that anybody could do this to a child. They get him up and loaded into the ambulance, and they ask him who did this to him. And he said it was Jodi Hildebrandt. Before the boy is taken to the hospital, he tells authorities that his sister is still at Jodi Hildebrandt's house, and she just happens to live nearby. So police rush over to Jodi's house, knock on the door, and she doesn't immediately answer. But when she does, it's kind of funny because Jodi's already on the phone with her lawyer. So on the body cam footage, we can see that Jodi's kind of sassy with the police. She's like, not going out without a fight. They have to physically pull her out of her own house. And she's like, you guys don't have a search warrant. Where's your search warrant? And she seems incredibly frantic. And I think it's because she realizes the gravity of the situation that she's in. But police inform her like, hey, we just found this boy and he's like on the verge of death. And we have reasonable suspicion to believe that there is another child in your house. So yeah, we don't need a search warrant. The police search through the home, finding lots of damning evidence along the way, when they finally come across Ruby Franke's 9-year-old daughter, and she's sitting cross-legged on the floor in a closet of a bathroom. They of course tell this girl that Jodi is arrested and that she can't hurt this little girl anymore. But she's not talking to police. She's not moving. She seems incredibly afraid of something.
You doing okay? You don't want to talk to me? Yeah, that's okay. Can you come with me though? I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're okay. And I get if you're scared. I would be too.
After about an hour, the officers bring her some food, and she, again, seems like scared to eat it. She kind of just sits there and stares at it for a couple minutes before she kind of like inches it towards her. And then after a few more minutes, she scarfs down this entire like personal pizza and most of a large pizza as well. It's so heartbreaking because these police officers are obviously there to help her and to provide her safety and comfort, and she's just so scared to even eat. And when she does, I'm sure she's just like ravenous because she's been deprived of food for so long. It's so sad. It takes another 3 hours to coax this girl out of the closet. Police officers and EMT kind of take shifts trying to get her comfortable enough to go and get some help. And finally, she stands up and walks out and is taken to the same hospital as her brother. At some point during this whole ordeal, Ruby actually returns to Jodi's home after a dentist appointment and finds the entire house swarmed with cops. She enters Jodi's residence and is soon arrested. The police then go to Ruby Franke's home looking for the 2 other Franke children that are not adults because they're scared that they're going to be much in the same condition as the 2 younger Franke children. However, the police do end up finding these children at one of Jodi's friends' homes, and her name was Pam. Pam and her husband seem incredibly confused by this whole situation because I don't think they understood the gravity of this entire situation. Ruby, I guess, just told them that there was some sort of family emergency going on, and so Pam just took the 2 teenage Franke children into her home and had them like clean up Pam's house, which is kind of weird in and of itself that like she's taking care of these children but is making them do housework. I don't know. I'm not going to go there, but it's just a little bit weird. I will note too that when police did talk to the teenage Franke children, they seemed very skittish and very scared to open up to the police. So I'm assuming if not some sort of physical abuse, then mental or emotional abuse has probably occurred, just because I can't imagine Ruby just abusing 2 of her children. I feel like it's kind of an all or nothing deal, unfortunately. Either way, it does appear that as of right now, the 4 minor Franke children are in Child Protective Services. After her arrest, one of Ruby's adult children, named Sherry Franke, posted on her socials that she was so happy that finally action had been taken against her mom and that she was put into custody. Additionally, it appears that 2 of Ruby's sisters, who also have like family vlogging YouTube channels, which is kind of weird, but okay, they made statements saying that they were doing everything they could behind the scenes to stop this abuse and that they knew it was happening, but they legally couldn't do anything more to help these children. So both Ruby and Jodi were arrested and taken in for questioning. Jodi seems to be a little bit more cooperative with investigators. She is a little bit skittish. She's like, I should probably be talking to my lawyer first. But she also says this.
If you knew all the pieces, I think you'd have a lot of empathy for what's going on.
And Ruby doesn't say a word except for the fact that she wants a lawyer, which is a smart thing to do. I think everybody should kind of just have a lawyer present when they're being interrogated. But the way that this woman just stares at the investigators is so fucking creepy. Like, they keep asking her if she's okay, if she's in shock, because the way she just is like, so unsettling. So unsettling. I've seen killers that look more friendly than this woman during that interrogation. I swear to God. Around the same time, Kevin Franke just appears at the police station being like, I want my kids. Where are my children? I want them. And police are kind of like, what are you doing here? This is not public knowledge that these 2 women have been taken into custody, that your children are not in their mother's custody. Like, who told you all this information? And so they start interrogating Kevin because, first of all, they want more information about this entire situation because they're a little bit confused. They don't have all the pieces of this puzzle, but also they really want to know, like, who informed you that your children are in CPS custody right now?
I still can't get over the fact that someone notified you to come here to pick up your kids. My guess is, was that Jodi?
I'm not going to answer that question.
So Kevin is pretty forthcoming throughout this interrogation. He doesn't tell investigators who told him to come to the police station, but he does tell investigators that he hasn't seen his children in over a year when he moved out of the house. That was the last time he had seen or spoke to his children. He also tells them that he and Ruby had actually made an agreement that he wouldn't talk to the children and would only communicate with Ruby on issues like bills and financial responsibility.
So how often would you guys communicate while she was down here?
Well, I don't know how often or long she was down here. We've communicated maybe 4 times in 2023 since January. I pay the bills.
Okay.
With my job, I provide the money, goes into a shared bank account, and that's my only involvement.
He hadn't really reached out to Ruby or the children because of an agreement that the couple had made, but it turns out that he did talk to Ruby about 4 times throughout 2022, just to talk about things like bills, because he was financially responsible for the children still. It's at this point that investigators learn that Jodi was counseling the couple before they got separated, and Kevin also says that Jodi helped him realize that he was addicted to porn. I want to pause here and put my 2 cents in, and this is completely my opinion and just my observations, but I'm not entirely sure about the statement that Kevin said about Jodi helping him realize that he had a porn addiction. And I say this because we have evidence of Jodi using sex and porn addiction to manipulate the people that she's counseling. It appears that Kevin put a lot of trust into Jodi, and Jodi has a past of manipulating and isolating people into making them do whatever she says. And I can't help but notice the similarities between the case of Adam and the case of Kevin. And it seems like Ruby was trying to, at this point, manipulate and isolate Ruby, and the best way to do that was by getting rid of Kevin, saying, you have this porn addiction, you have this sex addiction, you need to leave the house and work on that before you can be a part of this family again. Towards the end of this interrogation, Kevin is informed about the state of his children, and he seems genuinely distraught.
That's the condition of your son. given that information, your son was taken to the hospital. A warrant has been applied and granted by the Department of Child and Family Services.
So at this point, I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the piece of evidence that really helped investigators throughout this entire case, and that is Ruby's personal journal. I'm going to highlight a few very important pieces of this journal, and I'm going to go into detail. I'm going to be quoting parts of Ruby's journal, and here I want to place an extreme viewer discretion advised warning. If the beginning of this video up to this point was a little bit too much for you, I would highly suggest that you maybe just stop here or fast forward to this timestamp. I'm going to put it somewhere on screen. I'm going to be going into some gritty, nasty details. If that's not your vibe, I totally understand. I was debating even bringing the journal into this conversation, but I think it's important because we need to understand the scope of this entire situation and the extreme abuse that these children went through. I think it's important to the story, to the sentencing that we're going to be talking about later. So again, viewer discretion advised. Let's get into it. It's a common theme throughout this journal that Jodi and Ruby believe that these young children are, and the girl E, are being possessed by Satan, and they are doing everything in their power to make decisions that will benefit these children. That's their mindset, and I want you to keep that in mind as we go forward. They think that these children are being possessed by the devil. So just for some context, we're going to start looking at this journal around June to July of 2023. And at this point, Ruby writes that R refuses to do wall sits and that R has to stay outside for everything except for showering and going to the bathroom. And this is in Utah in the middle of summer. On July 14th, Ruby recorded that E refuses to do hard work, and we're not giving any context to what hard work means, but if we take what the prosecutor in this case said, he said that Jodi's home was very much like a concentration camp, so I can only imagine that this hard work was some sort of physical labor. Ruby writes a lengthy journal entry on July 10th. It's R's birthday, and he doesn't even know what month it is. I have to pause right there because that is a huge red flag to me. If somebody doesn't know what date it is, it gives me two different theories on that. The first one is that they are being so isolated from the outside world that they have no idea where they are, what date it is. And the other thing is that they're being so deprived of the things that they need, sleep, food, water, that they are becoming delirious. And so I think we should just pause a moment and think about that. E and R have been in so much deviant behavior, they won't control their bodily functions. They are both furious. Their selfish, sinful lifestyle is being intervened upon. R lies. I mean, all the time. He is a compulsive liar. I would never have expected this entire experience to shake my system. He has always been able to get what he wants, and now that he can't, he's furious. R told me he would rather have a glass of water than me as his mother. There was another incident the next day where R was forced to stand in the hot sun all day, and then Ruby threw a dirty bucket of mop water on his head. A few days later, there's a story about E and how she has been fasting for the past 2 days, and Ruby writes this. This is the day E anticipates breaking her 2-day fast. When we get home, I let E know that she has a hardened heart and will do one more day of fasting to invite her to humble. Ruby then states that E starts to flip out and starts saying crazy things like, "My mom is starving me," and calling it fasting. Yeah, Ruby, that's so crazy when that's exactly what the fuck you're doing. Oh my God, my daughter's so crazy. Oh my gosh, she says I'm starving her. No, this is fasting. I'm sorry, I'm no genius. I'm no expert on fasting, but I feel like you at least get to drink water when you're fasting, or at least like there's a time of day when you can eat, or like it's not just starving yourself for days on end. It's not starving the people you love for days on end. That is not fasting. It's crazy how this 9-year-old girl knows the difference between fasting and starving. At one point, Ruby has E climbing flights of stairs, carrying heavy boxes filled with books as some sort of exercise, I guess. And it came with the warning that any bad behavior or complaints would result in Ruby shaving E's head again. I guess Ruby gave E a little bit of a break, and then when she is instructed to start lifting the boxes again, the girl starts to whimper because she's a child who probably hasn't eaten or drank water in days and is made to do exercises that probably a full-grown adult couldn't do very easily, even if they had just eaten a full meal and drank some water. And so E gets her head shaved again. Throughout this journal, Ruby talks about how Jodi is currently trying to find a piece of land in the desert so that E and R can basically just live out in the desert and get rid of their demons there, which is concerning. Like you're not already doing enough harm to these children, my God. At one point in the journal, Ruby is talking about E, and she says this: E still tried to run. She screamed for another family. Water, food, care, love. A manipulative plug. You are loved. Again, I'd just like to stop for a second and really have us take that in. A manipulative plug asking for food, water, care, and love. Ruby sees that as a manipulative plug. The basic things that every child needs. You are loved. Okay. Love, I guess, can be shown in different ways, but those are the basic 4 things that people need. So no, Ruby. She is not loved. She is abused. There's one point where Ruby talks about the fact that she was kicking R while she was wearing boots, and how R was whipped with a towel. These children were extremely severely hurt. Physically, of course, mentally, emotionally. These kids are going to need so much time to heal. Of course, the physical wounds are going to take time, but those emotional wounds, those ones that are not visible, are probably going to take years to heal. These 2 women probably set these children back years. All I can hope is that these children, R and E, can find a stable household where they can just feel some sort of love from a family that truly cares about them. I hope, if nothing else, that these children can find that, because they deserve that after all of that they went through. I'm kind of just thinking about this case as I'm filming it. I spent a lot of time researching this. Like, this has been one of the deepest dives I've ever done on a case, because there's just so much evidence. There's body cam footage, there's video, there's audio, there's all of these things. And I actually filmed this once before, and I didn't like the way that it came out. And I think it was because I was a little bit too emotional, like, about all of this. And it's heartbreaking, but now I'm just mad. Now I'm just mad at Ruby. I'm mad at Jodi. I hope that they never get out. I hope that they fucking rot in prison. I hope that they do. And if you know anything about this case, and I'll obviously talk about it at the end, but they don't get the amount of time that they deserve. I think life in prison would be just fine for these women. I think it would do them well. I think then they would maybe finally learn their lesson. A few days after her arrest, Ruby is speaking on the phone with her husband, Kevin, and she says that this entire thing is a witch hunt and that they've been after her for years. She also states that some people don't understand that some children are evil. They're evil.
Adults have a really hard time understanding that children can be full of evil and what that takes to fight it.
And when Kevin tells Ruby that E and R are in the hospital, she says this: so weird. It's just not necessary. They're trying to exaggerate this. Girl, let me tell you, when I heard this conversation, I've never wanted to throw my phone against the wall harder in my life. I was like, if I saw this woman in a room, I would literally give her a black eye. Are you fucked? Yeah, these children are like malnourished, and they're covered in cuts and bruises, and they had duct tape all over them, and like, I don't know why they're being so dramatic about this. Fucked up. In another phone call, she talks about how the devil has taken over and how God is done. And she only cries when she's talking about how she is a good girl who doesn't do naughty things. Whatever the fuck that means, okay, lady.
And I'm a good woman. I don't do naughty things. I don't do naughty things. I'm a really good girl.
Then if we fast forward a few months, we can hear another jail phone call from Ruby where she talks about how being away from Jodi has just totally cleared her mind and that now everyone is where they need to be. Isn't that cute? Isn't that special?
This has been the strangest and the most miraculous intervention. It put everybody where they needed to be.
We can see a clear progression of Ruby totally flipping the blame to Jodi, talking about how Jodi is mentally ill and how she's just making herself the victim in all of this.
I think in the interview it's going to be apparent that she's mentally ill. I think putting the pieces together and just seeing she knew she was lying the whole time. And it's embarrassing too to repeat it. It's oh my gosh, how gullible was I? Oh my gosh, I didn't know she wasn't honest. I didn't know she would lie. And it's what else has she been lying about? Where else have I been deceived?
She begins to say at this point as well that Jodi completely isolated her from her husband, her older children, and the rest of her family. And it's I don't know, I can kind of see it, kind of what I talked about earlier. I could see that Jodi would do something like that, but I feel like Ruby had a part in this. She did stand by as her children were being completely and totally abused by Jodi. I don't know. I think she's to blame just as much as Jodi is in this entire situation. Jodi's phone calls in jail have also been released, and we can hear her saying things like, children are being abused and she's just trying to help them.
When I get out of here, I have a story to tell, and I am going to try to do everything I can to protect the children, because that's what's happening, is that kids are being horribly abused.
If she thinks that she's saving these children, no. And if she thinks that her therapy techniques are helping the children, also no. I think the most shocking thing that Jodi said throughout these phone calls, though, has to be this.
We didn't do that. We didn't do that. Those pictures we did not do. He did that to himself, yes. Did we put that on him and then he rubbed around and cut himself? Yes. But we didn't do that.
So in November of 2023, Kevin Franke finally decided to file for divorce. And then in December of 2023, both Jodi and Ruby pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. And it was at this point as well that Ruby decided that she would testify against Jodi. On February 20th of 2024, Jodi Hildebrandt was sentenced to 4 to 30 years in prison. And this is technically those 4 charges of aggravated child abuse served consecutively. But according to some of the experts that spoke on this case, they think it's going to be about 30 years. During her sentencing, she read a prepared statement where she talked about how she loved and cared for the Franke children. She also stated that one of the reasons she didn't want to go to trial was because she wanted to prevent these children from having to relive the trauma and abuse, which, girl, you caused that trauma, you caused that abuse. What are you talking about? You're trying to act like you're this good, saintly woman? I'm sorry, bitch. Straight to jail with you. Okay, Jodi wasn't the only guilty party in all of this, but she was the direct hand in their abuse. The judge in this case actually said that Jodi terrorized these children. So good on that judge for saying that straight to her face, because she deserved to hear that. Ruby's sentencing was on the same day, February 20th of 2024, and she was given the same sentence as Jodi, this 4 to 30 year sentence. And she also read a prepared statement where she talked about how Jodi manipulated her and led her to believe that the abuse was the right thing to do for her children. So after the sentencing and all was said and done, Chad, one of the older Franke children, actually took to TikTok and Twitch to kind of make light of the situation. He's had multiple streams where he kind of opens up to his audience and kind of answers questions that his chat might have about the entire situation. And he was actually asked the question if he was ever going to visit his mom, and he said that if he were to do that, it wouldn't be for a long time.
Have I visited Ruby in prison? I have not. I have not done that.
Are you going to?
If I did, it won't be for a long time.
There are also videos of Chad and the older Franke children hanging out together, spending time together as a family, which I think is probably a great thing after all of this, to kind of just hang out with each other, kind of comfort each other. I think that makes me happy to see that they're kind of healing and trying to mend these wounds that their parents caused them. Kevin is currently trying to get custody of the 4 younger Franke children. I, along with many others, are a little bit skittish about this whole situation because, of course, he wasn't there technically when these children were being physically abused, but he did just kind of stand by and support his wife through the entire 8 Passengers channel, where there's documented evidence of abuse. I don't know, it's kind of a slippery slope because they are technically his children and he is the one that technically should get custody if they find that he's a fit parent, but something in the back of my head just tells me that these children need to get away from their father as well. Kevin has also filed a lawsuit against Jodi Hildebrandt where he accused her of intentional and negligent infliction of emotional distress and negligence in general. It also appears that Kevin and the younger Franke children are currently getting mental health help, which I think is a great idea. But yeah, that is the sick and twisted case of the YouTuber turned fucking abusive criminal Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke. If you're still here, thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. This was definitely one of the hardest videos I've ever had to make. It feels like I'm a little bit emotionally detached from this story, but I think it's just because I've been researching it for so long and I'm just so mad at this point at these horrible, horrible parents. I think if we can learn anything from this entire situation, it's that, again, people are not always what they seem. We can, see all these influencers, all of these YouTubers, and it looks like they have this happy life with these happy children, and they're getting abused behind the scenes. I think it's important that we look out for these signs. If you see something suspicious, say something, report it. I feel like it's better to be overcautious than undercautious, And I think it's important that we look at cases like this so that we can be better informed and maybe help children, help people in the future. I appreciate each and every one of you. Be safe out there and keep being the bad bitches that you are. Goodbye, guys.